I could feel the perimeter coming apart long before anyone shouted the order to fall back. An odd hush between shell bursts, a tremor running through the soles of my boots, a collective drawing in of breath among lads who'd run out of ways to look brave. One moment, I was kneeling behind a blasted-out lorry, trading single shots with figures darting along the far wall. The next, those figures surged forward, and the officer's whistle shrilled 3 frantic notes. I didn't question it. I just scrambled up, rifle clutched across my chest, and bolted with the others into the gauntlet of smoke and glass that used to be the Rue de l'Ancienne Poste. All the careful drill dissolved into something much simpler. Move when the man in front moves. Stop only if you're dead or helping someone who is. I found myself counting breaths instead of steps, as though the rhythm might keep the panic at bay. On either side, shop fronts gaped like broken teeth. Mannequins sprawled in ridiculous poses beneath shelves of shattered crockery. Each time a mortar thumped, bits of roof tile pattered down, as if the sky itself were crumbling. The air tasted of plaster dust and burning paraffin, and every pull of it scraped the throat raw. We dodged through a narrow alley choked with debris. Somewhere behind, someone yelled for a medic, voice cracking on the last syllable. I didn't slow even when that voice turned into a thin animal whine, because the column kept flowing and fear tugged us forward like a riptide. I told myself I'd hear that fellow later, buy him a pint back home, a lie I knew even as I thought it. But lies can keep your legs moving when truth would nail your feet to the cobble. A low church tower slid into view above the rooftops, its bell tolling every few seconds. Not in peal, but single, stubborn strokes, as if some unseen vicar rang it by hand in a private act of defiance. The note carried oddly clear between shell bursts, and for a heartbeat I pictured Sunday mornings, brass polish, the smell of damp hymn books. Then a burst of machine gun fire stitched across our path, chipping stone and turning memories to powder. We hugged a corner and sprinted past a row of terrified civilians huddled in a doorway. An old woman clutched a loaf of bread to her chest, eyes wide as moons. A little boy clung to her skirt, cheeks streaked, staring at the rifles as though they were props in a play gone horribly wrong. I met his gaze for half a second, long enough to mouth "Allez vite" and point toward a cellar stair. He blinked, then jerked his mother by the sleeve. Rounds smacked the wall above my head. Chips of masonry stung like hornets. I ducked, shifted the rifle sling higher on my aching shoulder, and pushed on. The lads ahead were thinning out. Harry from Liverpool limped along the gutter, left boot squelching dark. I grabbed his elbow. He waved me off with a grin that looked painted on, but I kept pace beside him just in case. We burst onto a broader thoroughfare littered with wrecked bicycles and an overturned tram. Smoke rolled across the tracks in languid gray sheets. Somewhere past that haze, the sea lay waiting, though in that moment it felt as distant as home. A pair of French soldiers jogged alongside, muttering to each other, eyes darting upward each time a high-pitched whine announced another Stuka dive. The bombs landed closer now, dull concussions that vibrated in the ribs. I realized my hands were trembling. Couldn't tell if from exhaustion or the thought that this might truly be the end of the line. Weeks of retreat had chipped away at faith, one skirmish at a time, but the perimeter was supposed to hold, damn it. We'd been promised boats, promised cover, promised time. Promises crack easy under artillery. Harry stumbled. I caught him round the waist. His trouser leg was soaked through, warm and sticky against my fingers. We ducked into a doorway to wrap a field dressing, made a clumsy job of it, cloth flapping loose like surrender. A shell landed 2 streets away, rattling every window still intact. We exchanged a glance that needed no words. Stay, and we'd be buried here. So out we went again. Harry leaning hard, me shoulder burning. The closer we drew to the harbor quarter, the thicker the throng became. Cooks with pistols, signalers clutching radios that no longer crackled, stretcher bearers steering litters through knots of men who scarcely noticed. Helmets clinked, rifle slings squeaked, a steady metallic chorus undercut by the distant boom of naval guns. Over it all hung the smell, cordite, petrol, and a salt tang drifting on the wind, hinting at surf. A sudden gust parted the smoke long enough to reveal a sliver of gray sky, low and heavy, like a lid clamped on the world. Seagulls wheeled above, shrieking as if mocking us. I wondered whether they'd feast well tonight. Thought of roast fowl and gravy and hated myself for it. We reached a crumpled barricade of sandbags and bicycles. Beyond, the street sloped gently toward the dunes. I could just make out the pallid strip where wet sand met choppy water. Something inside me sagged, not relief exactly, but the loosening of a knot drawn too tight. Yet the moment lasted only a heartbeat before a new knot cinched even tighter. Because now the open ground yawned before us with no walls to hide behind. Harry and I slid down the scree of rubble, joined a file of men skittering across a railway line crusted with ash. The rails rang underfoot like tuning forks. Ahead, an officer waved us onward with a revolver, mouth moving in shouting. Silent shouts I couldn't hear over the roar in my ears. My lungs burned. Every inhale fetched a rattle from deep inside. We topped the last rise, and there it was, the beach, broad and bleak, strewn with kit bags, shell cases, abandoned bicycles, and the first ranks of soldiers queuing like penitents before some invisible altar. The channel lay beyond, slate-colored and restless, whitecaps slapping against the ribs of a grounded fishing boat. Even from here I tasted the salt, dry on cracked lips. I helped Harry down the dune's face, sand spilling into our boots. It clung wet and cold through the holes in my socks. Somewhere to the left, a wounded man weakly cried out for water, hoarsely, voice breaking on each syllable. Another lad knelt beside him, futilely pouring the last dribble from a canteen. For a brief, impossible instant, the horizon looked clear, just water, gulls, and smoke trailing south where ships burned. Then, a metallic, loud shriek sliced the air. I jerked my gaze upward. 2 black dots grew into the unmistakable silhouettes of Stukas, wings angled, sirens wailing their hungry lament. Around me, helmets tilted skyward. A collective breath stopped halfway. Orders to scatter were drowned by the rising howl. I tightened my grip on Harry's tunic. muscles coiled, though there was nowhere to go. Time slowed. The aircraft dipped their noses, and the first bombs tumbled free, spinning, glittering against the gray. I tasted metal on my tongue, felt the wet sand shift under my boots, and knew the real fight was only just beginning. Sand erupted all around. A geyser of grit and white spray that slapped bare skin like buckshot. The blast picked me up, seemed to hang me in the air for one absurd, weightless beat, then hurled me face first into a dune. Ears rang, mouth packed with salt-sweet sand. I sucked in a breath that tasted of cordite and seaweed and tried to dig myself out before the next bomb found me. The second detonation landed farther off, still close enough that the ground kicked, but the shockwave came muffled, as though I'd been dropped inside a drum. When the roar ebbed, I heard only static in my skull, and, dim beneath it, men shouting for stretchers. I spat, wiped grit from my eyes, and crawled toward a darker blot on the sand that proved to be Harry curled on his side. Blood soaked the makeshift bandage around his calf, turning the cloth the color of brick dust. He blinked at me, dazed. "You all right, mate?" I had to repeat it twice before my own voice reached my ears. Concerned, raising voice slightly. "You all right, mate?" He nodded, then winced and pressed a hand flat to the wound. Another pair of lads skidded to a halt, helped lift him. We half-carried, half-dragged him down the slope toward the tide line, where surf foamed gray under a ceiling of smoke. Every few yards, a crater yawned, still steaming. Rifles, helmets, packs lay strewn like a giant child's discarded toys. Closer to the water, an officer waved a flare pistol, rallying stragglers. His mustache was scorched at one end, giving him a lopsided expression of perpetual surprise. Shouting, authoritative. "Form on me, move east along the beach, keep spacing." He pointed toward a distant smudge that might have been the East Mole. I didn't fancy a march across open sand with Junkers overhead, but orders were orders, and nowhere else looked safer. We set off in staggered columns, boots sinking ankle-deep. Wet grains worked into the ragged fabric at my heels. Every step grated. The roar of the sea filled gaps the shelling left, hiss and crash, like a monstrous lung breathing against the land. Gulls still circled, though less bold now, scattered by the bombs. The further east we tramped, the thicker the crowd became. Companies bunched into untidy lines, each man gripping his place as though queue etiquette might hold back the Wehrmacht. Some stood stiff and silent, staring at the horizon, where home lay hidden beyond haze. Others squatted to smoke, fingers trembling so badly they could scarcely strike a match. A few simply wandered, eyes glassy, kit gone, as if they'd woken from one nightmare only to find another. We passed a casualty station, improvised behind an overturned lifeboat. Medics knelt in churned sand, thick with footprints and blood, bandaging, injecting morphine, murmuring names of saints or sweethearts. A padre moved among the stretchers, his cassock torn, hands dusty with sand and ash. He raised them in blessing over a lad no older than 17, whose chest barely lifted beneath his tunic. I looked away, saw Harry watching too, jaw clenched, then staring at his own thigh as though calculating odds. The queue ahead stalled. Word rippled back. Destroyer alongside the mole was full. Next one due sometime tonight. Night felt impossibly distant. The sun still hung a dirty yellow disk above the smoke band. Yet already a damp chill crept from the water, slipping under collars, pricking sweat-soaked skin. I tasted salt where it dried on my lips. An engine's snarl cut through the murmur. Instinct shoved us flat. A Messerschmitt came skimming low, guns flickering. Bullets stitched the shoreline, popping like hail in a tin roof. Spray leapt in tight rows where rounds hit water. Sand spurted among the queues. Men hugged the ground, helmets thumping, packs jolting their spines. The fighter swept past, banking out to sea. A heartbeat of silence, then another plane, then two more dancing along the beach as though it were a fairground shooting gallery. When the last drone faded, we peeled ourselves up, ears ringing anew. A corporal staggered by, clutching his arm, blood pulsing between fingers. Someone yelled for morphine. No medics left, only a signaller who tore off his own field dressing with teeth and wrapped it tight. The wounded man bit down on a chunk of driftwood, eyes rolling. Somewhere behind us, a church bell tolled again, muffled by distance but stubborn as ever. One clear note. Pause. Another. It sounded absurd out here, beneath blasted heavens, yet its persistence steadied something inside me. Bells meant towns, walls, hearths. They meant England, even if this particular bell belonged to France. The queue lurched forward a dozen paces, stalled once more. We shuffled, rifles clinking, helmets knocking whenever someone turned too sharply. Harry leaned on me, leg trembling, sweat darkening the brim of his cap. "Reckon they'll patch me up over there?" he muttered. "Course," I said, though my gaze kept sliding to the crimson seeping through his dressing. He forced a grin, trying to be cheerful. "Bet the nurses are smashing," I managed to laugh. Thin, brittle, but it passed for camaraderie. Time stretched. Sun smudged toward the horizon, bleeding rust into low cloud. Shadows lengthened across the sand, merging until queue and beach seemed one dark mass. Smoke still drifted from town. Occasionally a dull boom reminded us the perimeter fight hadn't finished, even if for us the war now shrank to the width of this shoreline. Another officer wove through, counting. "No boats till dark. Dig in if you can. Spread out, heads down when they come." He didn't need to name the they. Shovels appeared, tin plates, even helmets used as scoops. We scraped shallow scrapes, barely coffin deep, but the act of doing something, anything, eased the helpless itch. I clawed sand until nails split, then lay belly flat, pack wedged behind my shoulders as half-hearted parapet. Harry propped himself beside me, breathing in short huffs. Dusk gathered, smearing blues and purples across the surf. A distant rumble announced returning bombers. Searchlights fingered the clouds from somewhere inland, pale lances probing. Our slit trench offered laughable cover, yet the illusion mattered. I pressed my helmet lower, cheek to damp sand, and listened to my heart kick against ribs. The formation droned overhead, seeking bigger prey than single men, destroyers, tankers, any silhouette against water. They released payloads farther along the coast. The ground trembled, and an orange bloom blossomed on the eastern rim. We winced, counted under breath, but no debris reached us. When quiet fell again, the cues reshaped themselves. Word of a paddle steamer coming alongside swung men east in a slow, relentless tide. We rose, brushed sand from tunics, shouldered rifles that felt twice as heavy. Harry hissed at the first step. I slipped an arm round his waist, and we limped on. Figures loomed through gloom. A Highland regiment, kilts flapping, voices low and musical even in fatigue. A knot of RAF ground crew, hauling tool chests they refused to abandon. French poilus with eyes as hollow as ours. Nationalities blended, distinctions blurred, all faces smeared with soot or dried blood. Rank, accent, even age faded, until only one question remained. Will you reach a deck tonight or not? A sudden flare arced high, bathing the beach in ghastly white for 3 heartbeats. Thousands of helmets glinted like fish scales. Shadows stretched weirdly long. In that stark glare, I saw the sea crowded with silhouettes, trawlers, tugs, motor launches, lying just beyond surf, too shallow to approach, too distant to swim. Between them and us rolled a band of water the color of pewter, innocent as a moat, yet no man wished to step into it voluntarily. The flare sputtered out. Darkness snapped back. I blinked phosphor ghosts from my vision. Ahead, the queue funneled toward the mole, a narrow ribbon of timber stretching into nocturnal emptiness. Somewhere at its far end, men were climbing, wedging between stanchions, leaping gaps to reach a ship's rail. I couldn't see them, but the rhythm of movement carried along the decking a throbbing rumor of hope. Harry's weight dragged harder. I tightened grip, tried to steady him, but felt his knees buckle. We knelt in sand. Breath rasped in his throat. I fumbled fresh dressing, hands slick with sweat, tied it over the first. Blood oozed still. He squeezed my shoulder. "Leave me if it comes to it." "Shut up," I said, voice raw. I wasn't sure whether the sting in my eyes came from smoke or something else. Engines again, this time nearer, throaty like lorries in low gear. I looked up. Not aircraft. Torpedo boats maybe, or coastal patrol craft, edging closer under cover of dark. Their wakes gleamed faint in starlight. The queue sensed it too. A murmur lifted, half prayer, half warning. Then farther inland, a mortar thumped and whined, shell incoming. Instinct shouted before thought. I rolled atop Harry as the round landed short, spraying us with wet sand. Shouts, coughing, curses rippled outward. Another whistle overhead, closer. We flattened, pressed faces to earth that smelled of salt and cordite and cold. Silence afterward felt louder than any blast. I raised my head, ears ringing. Searchlights swept again, chalk streaks across cloud. Their beams caught something low and fast skimming the shoreline, and Heinkel, maybe two, sliding into position for a strafing run. Air crews preferred daylight, but tonight, desperation belonged to both sides. I tasted metal on my tongue once more. Harry's hand tightened round my wrist. The engines pitched up, noses dipping, gun ports flickering red, and the beach erupted in frantic motion, men diving, screaming, clawing at trenches too shallow to hide them. My muscles coiled, nowhere left to go, yet knowing we had to try. The first rounds ripped the dark apart. I shut my eyes, felt the wet sands shift again, and braced for the hammer to fall. The Heinkels raked the shore in long, deliberate arcs, tracers flicking like fiery knitting needles through the night. Sand geysered where rounds struck, puffs of dull orange under the searchlights, then fell in cold curtains that hissed against tin helmets. I lay flat, cheek pressed to Harry's webbing, wishing I could melt into the grit. Each burst felt personal, as though those gunners saw my name painted on the beach and meant to underline it with bullets. When the motors finally dwindled, silence returned in ragged shreds, broken only by the low moans of men who hadn't ducked fast enough. We waited a full minute, maybe two, before daring to lift our heads. The queue had dissolved into scattered knots, some crouched in shallow scrapes, others hugging the rims of bomb craters that steamed faintly in the cooling air. Somewhere to my right, a lad coughed wetly, a sound I'd begun to recognize too easily. Blood in the lungs. Two medics slogged toward him, boots slipping in mud the sea had left behind. Their silhouettes kept blurring against the searchlight glow, as though the night itself tried to erase them. Harry's breath came in harsh, shallow bursts. The latest shock had squeezed color from his face, leaving him a waxy gray. I slid an arm beneath his shoulders, pulled him upright until he sat with knees drawn. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the surf. Thought that was it. "Not yet," I said, though the words felt fragile, as if the very act of speaking them might tempt fate to prove me wrong. A whistle shrilled somewhere down the line, one short blast, then two rapid. It wasn't a signal we'd drilled, but the meaning traveled anyway. "Form up! Move!" Men uncurled from shell scoops and craters, dusted sand from uniforms, re-slung rifles. A sergeant I'd never seen before strode past, voice hoarse, yet steady. "Queues reorganize, 5 abreast. Follow the flare." He jabbed his torch toward the far-off mole, where a pinpoint lantern blinked. Someone near me asked, "What's coming in?" The sergeant grunted. "Could be a minesweeper. Could be a bloody rowing skiff. Count your blessings and get in line." Harry made to stand, but faltered, breath hissing. I got under his right arm. Together we hobbled toward the freshly forming column. The sand felt heavier than before, waterlogged, reluctant to let us leave. Each footfall oozed and suctioned, and the cold seeped through soles worn thin since Belgium. By the time we reached the tail of the queue, hundreds had already slotted in. From afar, the line resembled a wounded snake, belly to the surf, head stretched toward salvation that kept inching away. Orders traveled mouth to ear, distorted by wind and fatigue. Keep spacing, bayonets off, helmets on tight. Repetition lent them a kind of prayerful rhythm. I found myself mouthing the syllables, as though liturgy might armor skin. Gray dawn seeped into the sky before anyone realized night had surrendered. The smoke pall thinned, revealing ragged clouds scudding low. They glowed amber where the rising sun caught their underbellies, a beauty so casual it felt rude. For the first time I saw how wide the beach truly was. From dunes to waterline stretched a somber plain of churned sand, punctuated by wreckage. Lorries half buried like giant beetles, burnt-out Bren carriers decorated with gulls, lifebelts blown inland by last night's wind. And woven through it all, endless files of khaki and blue, each man hoping his feet found deck before Luftwaffe sights found him. The queue edged forward by fits. 10 paces gained, halt. Another 5, halt. Each pause invited the enemy's attention. Each advance renewed hope just enough to hurt. I shifted Harry's weight, feeling my own legs wobble. Hunger gnawed where ration biscuits once sat. Water tins were long drained, though a merciful drizzle had passed at dawn, and some caught drops on tongue. A distant drone rose behind us. Our heads snapped skyward in grim unison. 3 specks emerged from the southeast, noses glinting. Stukas. Even before their sirens wound up, the mere profile drew a collective groan, the sound men make when doctors' forceps appear. Orders barked down. Down! Stay spread! But cues are stubborn things. They resist sudden change. Some froze, others bolted for the dunes. Still others simply knelt where they stood, palms over helmets like parishioners waiting communion. I lowered Harry as gently as haste allowed, threw myself beside him. The sirens peaked, an unholy wail that pierced ribcage and faith alike. Then bombs whistled, distant at first, then terrifyingly near. Explosions marched across the beach in staggered strides. The air turned thick, pressed against eardrums until they rang out of time with my heart. A geyser erupted 20 yards ahead, tossing men like broken dolls. Spray and shrapnel rained, rattling my helmet's stinging cheeks. The shockwave lifted me onto one elbow, slammed grit into my mouth. When the last Stuka climbed away, its engine fading into the morning, silence came broken and uneven. I rolled to sitting, wiped blood, someone's, maybe mine, from my temple. Checked Harry. He blinked at me, dazed but breathing. Around us, figures rose one by one, coated in sand that made them seem carved from the beach itself. New craters smoked, some still deeper than a tall man's height. One held seawater already sloshing in, a briny grave no family would visit. Yet the queue reformed. It always did. Some unseen magnet drew men back into line, as though every disrupted thread yearned to be woven once more. I hauled Harry up, and we limped to our place. Ahead, the mole's lantern had vanished, replaced by a smudge of hull, low, dark, angular. Word rippled. Minesweeper indeed, HMS Kellet. Or maybe Salamander, no one certain. Her deck looked impossibly far, yet the thought of real steel underfoot sent a tremor of longing through the ranks. The sun climbed higher, burning off sea haze. With it came heat that felt wrong after so long chilled, turning helmets into ladles of sweat and making wounds throb anew. Flies appeared as if conjured, crawling over bandages, tasting salt on skin. Cries for water grew sharper, edged with panic. Mid-morning, the Henkels returned, this time paired with BF-109s that skimmed barely above the waves, guns spitting. They strafed in parallel with the shoreline, forcing cues to drop flat while bullets whipped sand into miniature dust devils around torsos. I pressed my face into the wetness at surf's edge. Salt filled nose and throat until coughing risked drawing fire. So I counted, quietly, 1, 2, 3, waiting for the planes to exhaust their belts and climb. When they did, the beach answered with feeble rifle fire, a gesture more of anger than effect. Cues rose again, shuffling forward, forever forward. The minesweeper's silhouette steadied against the horizon, but she could not reach us, draft too deep. Instead, her crew launched ship's boats, clinker-built gigs that bobbed toward shore on small outboards, their pilots hunched low. Cheer rippled as the first nose grounded. Sailors leapt out, boots splashing, shouting for the wounded first. Pandemonium threatened, the desperate surging past rank and file, but discipline, thin as paper, somehow held. Those nearest formed human chains, passing stretchers over the shallows, while officers barked names to record who left. I watched 2 ratings lift Harry under the arms, steady him toward the gig. My own chest tightened, relief mingled with fear of being left. A petty officer turned to me. "Space for 2 more walking wounded. Can you still carry that rifle?" I gave the weapon a reflexive pat. Wood chipped, barrel sand-scoured, but still mine. Firmly, "Aye." Gruffly, "Then in, lad." I splashed through surf that numbed shins, heaved myself over the gunwale. Planks smelled of tar and seaweed. 10 of us crammed aboard. The coxswain gunned the outboard. We lurched away from the beach, noses dripping, boots sloshing ankle-deep in bilge. Home, I thought, just a deck's width away. Yet even here, safety proved fickle. Within minutes, the Luftwaffe reappeared, this time a lone 109 angling for our tiny convoy. The coxswain, cursing, cursed, throttled higher, weaving between swells that slapped boards. The fighter opened fire. A hiss, then splinters flew from the stern. Water spouted through new holes. A rating tossed a canvas bucket, began bailing. Another worked the Bren gun mounted at the bow, loosing bursts that seemed to vanish without touching sky. Rounds ripped the water meters off the port side, each impact throwing spray across faces already crusted with salt. The boat behind us caught a burst mid-beam. I saw 2 figures topple overboard, arms windmilling, then nothing. The minesweeper loomed now, close enough that I could read her pennant. But the fighter circled, persistent, her pilot tilting wings almost playful before diving again. "Keep heads down," the petty officer bellowed, right as the 109's cannons barked. One shell struck our engine housing. Metal shrieked. The outboard coughed, died. Momentum carried us a few more lengths before we wallowed, helpless, in choppy swell. Panic trembled in throats. The Bren gun jammed. Its loader fumbled for a new magazine with shaking hands. Harry clutched the gunwale, face pale, lips bluish. Blood loss and cold conspired. I slid closer, braced him against my shoulder. Something in me went very still, a place beyond fear, where only actions mattered. I sighted my rifle across the bow, waited for the fighter's next pass, though I knew full well a Lee Enfield could no more swat a Messerschmitt than spear a shark. Yet suddenly, flak blossomed, a spray of black puffs. Higher up, the minesweeper's forward pom-pom barked, stitching the sky. Tracers climbed, corded by the deeper thump of a destroyer farther out. The 109 broke off, banking hard, sunlight flashing on canopy before it vanished inland. For one glorious breath, the air belonged to us again. Cheering rose, hoarse, exhausted but fierce. Sailors threw a tow line across, hauled us alongside the minesweeper's ladder. I coaxed Harry up rung by rung, wood slick with brine, until hands reached down, gripping his wrists, lifting him over. My own ascent felt surreal, legs numb, arms weak, yet at the top, a deck of honest steel kissed my boots. The clang echoed through bones like a church bell, alive, alive. But relief proved short. The minesweeper's skipper leaned over the rail, voice taut. "We're full, can't take more. Orders are back to shore for another load." Even as he spoke, ratings swung our battered gig around, prepared to drop it. I realized we'd only traded one risk for another duty, returning across that gauntlet to fetch fresh souls. I looked at Harry, settled against the superstructure with a morphine needle finally in his thigh. His eyelids fluttered, a half-smile ghosting lips. "Go," he murmured. "Bring the rest." I nodded, throat thick, slung my rifle anew, and clambered back down the ladder into the same scarred boat, its engine now patched, water bailed. The coxswain glanced at me, eyes bloodshot but shining. "Ready, soldier?" "As ready as anyone gets," I said. We pushed off, bow swinging toward the vast strand where queues had reformed yet again, patient as tides. Gray clouds massed overhead, and somewhere inside them Stukas wheeled. The surf slapped boards in a rhythm that felt like a drumbeat, calling us back to the endless line, the strafing runs, the thin, bright thread of hope stretched taut between beach and steel. Spray slapped the gig's bow, cold needles on knuckles already raw from rowing. The patched-up outboard coughed thin blue smoke, but held its tune. Each putt-putt drummed in my chest like a second heart. I kept one hand on an oar to steady our zigzag, while the coxswain watched the clouds for dots that might sprout wings. The beach loomed ahead, a long bruise of churned sand, gimcracked with craters, helmets, hopes, and the endless queue still snaking from dunes to surf, as though no one had moved at all in the hours we'd been gone. Wind shifted, carrying a mix of sea salt and burnt rubber. I tasted both, bitter on the back of my tongue. Far behind, the minesweeper's silhouette dulled to a charcoal smear, her deck already stacked with bodies, living this time, God willing. I pictured Harry among them, morphine easing the bite in his leg, maybe even a mug of tea warming his hands. The thought steadied me more than any ration rum. 2 minutes, the coxswain growled over his shoulder, eyes never leaving sky. "Keep low till we ground. If anything dives, don't stand up trying to be bloody Samson. Planks won't stop cannon shells." A ripple of nervous laughter fluttered through the passengers. 3 sappers, a signaler with broken specs taped, an RAF lad clutching an empty flare pistol as if it were a lucky charm, and me. We gripped the gunnels, boots braced, hearts marching faster than the engine. Closer now, details sharpened. I saw men hunched in shallow scrapes, rifles across knees, faces the color of late milk. A padre moved down the line, mumbling blessings no one could quite hear above surf. At his side shuffled a medic laden with water tins as precious as gold bars. Over everything hung a dull gray sky, clouds scudding west like refugees that owned the luxury of flight. A flare hissed overhead, green arc, then pop. Signal to approach. The coxswain gunned the outboard, bow lifting before slapping hard into the trough. Someone cursed, someone retched. My palms burned where rope had chafed them earlier, now rubbed raw again by the oar's salt rough shaft. I shifted grip, rolled shoulders, felt the rifle stock across my back thump with each swell. 50 yards. We could see individual faces now, lips cracked white, eyes sun-pinched, expressions balanced between hunger and wary belief. A sergeant waded forward, water at his thighs, waving an arm wearily but firmly. "Wounded first, then Bren teams, then the rest. Keep your bleeding order or nobody moves." His voice rasped, yet it carried, whipped along by the wind like a lash. We grounded with a crunch, keel biting pebbles. A shudder ran through the hull, bilge water sloshed at our ankles. I vaulted out alongside the coxswain, icy surf soaking trousers to the waist, and we heaved the bow round to point seaward for the run back. 2 ratings splashed from behind a beached lorry, wooden fenders under arms. They jammed them between gunnels and sand to steady the boat against the undertow. Organization, thin and desperate, still clung by fingernails. The first stretcher came. Young lad with half a uniform, bandage blooming crimson at the ribs. His eyes flicked open, met mine, then rolled skyward as a shell detonated somewhere inland. Dust puffed over the dunes, but the blast felt distant, like gunnery on a cinema screen. We slid the stretcher onto planks already dark with earlier bloodstains. More followed. A lance corporal minus half a foot. A clerk clutching his stomach with both hands as though trying to hold himself together. Each addition dropped the freeboard an inch lower. Cold water licked across boots, retreated, returned. Q discipline faltered as the able-bodied watched their chances ebb with every stretcher. Voices rose, pleading, angry, sometimes apologetic even, in desperation. The sergeant barked again, but authority carried little weight against the picture of a boat about to leave without you. One private tried to climb in out of turn. The coxswain shoved him back with an oar blade, eyes flat as slate. The lad staggered, shame twisting his face, then hunched away. A Bren gun team clattered forward, barrel wrapped in oily rag to keep sand at bay. Their corporal paused, glanced at our waterline. "We'll swamp you, sir." "Another stone of kit won't matter once we're under fire," the coxswain replied. "In or out, make your choice fast." They chose in, passing the gun and spare barrel first, then themselves. The boat groaned, but settled. I did a quick count. 16 souls plus crew, maybe 200 stone over safe load. We could argue safety on the other side of the channel. Someone thrust a dented biscuit tin at me. Inside rattled a precious handful of .303 rounds. "For the Bren," he said. Didn't wait for thanks. I stowed it under a bench, lashed tight with bootlace. Small comforts. Overhead, the sky's tone changed. A low, droning hum like distant bees amplified through tin. Not Stuka's. This sound lacked the banshee whine. Heinkel's or Dorniers in level formation, hunting bigger prey. Even so, every head tilted upwards and silence fell thicker than smoke. I tasted bile, old reflex, fear reminding muscles they still cared about survival. High above, glints caught what little sun pierced the cloud deck. 6, 8, maybe 10 bombers sliding west. They ignored us, intent on ships offshore, but each man followed the flight until it vanished into haze. When the sound dwindled, breath returned, shallow, synchronized as though taken from a shared set of lungs. Well, the sergeant leaned into the gunwale, handed across a last casualty, French infantryman, eyes half closed, "Mama," over and over. "That's the lot," the sergeant said, voice cracking. Then, softer, he added, "Come back if you can." "We'll try," the coxswain answered, but both knew promises weighed nothing out here. We shoved the fenders clear. The boat lurched seaward. Shouts followed, warnings about shoals, unseen obstacles, incoming aircraft. My boots slid on boards slick with seawater. I braced an oar, pushing against surge until depth freed the keel. The outboard sputtered once, twice, then coughed to life. Its engine note sounded gamier than before, like a lung missing half its breath, but it drove us forward, and that was enough. Spray rose, stinging open scrapes on my wrists. I crouched mid-deck, head level with the wounded, to keep center of gravity low. The sea smelled of diesel and cordite, undertones of rot, where wrecks lay just beneath the chop. Around us, other gigs and launches zigzagged like beetles on a puddle, each nursing its own load of battered lives. Some towed empty lifeboats ready for another turn. Some carried stretchers piled too high. Behind, onshore flak still hammered at invisible foes, and the dune line flickered with muzzle flashes. Half a minute out, the coxswain cut throttle, eyes fixed on a sandbar breaking water dead ahead. "Tide shifted," he muttered. "We'll swing north, follow the blue pennant." He pointed to a motor launch, sporting a scrap of navy cloth atop its radio mast, the improvised guide flag for safe passage. We angled that way, engine droning steady now, boards creaking like an old wardrobe hauled across floorboards. The Bren gun corporal crouched near bow, wiping spray from goggles. He glanced at me. "Ever think we'd queue for a ride on something like this?" he said, voice rueful. I shook my head. "I'd pay double fare if it comes with a cuppa." The joke sounded thin, but it coaxed a grin from one of the sappers, cradling a bandaged hand. Mid-channel, or what felt like it, the wounded clerk stirred. His fingers found mine where they gripped the thwart. "Tell me it's far enough," he whispered. "Nearly there," I lied, knowing we'd been miles yet. The lie felt cruel and kind in equal parts. A sharp crack rolled across water, not thunder, naval gunfire. Far out, 2 destroyers traded rounds with coastal batteries. One shell whined overhead, impact blooming a great plume just beyond a bulky trawler. Our little boat rose on the swell that followed, dropped, rose again. Every man held some part of the gunwale a fraction tighter. Then from the south, a buzz developing into full-throated roar. BF-109s, loose flight of 3, cutting low across glinting crests. The coxswain swore, jammed throttle. The engine screamed protest. Deck pitched, helmets clanked. Someone prayed in Gaelic. The fighters roared past, climbing to harass a cluster of launches nearer the mole, shark pack after a different shoal of fish. Still, adrenaline tightened throats even after they banked away. I leaned to check the French lad, pulse weak, breath fluttering. His lips moved, but produced no sound. I squeezed his shoulder, felt bones brittle beneath tunic. "Hold fast, mon ami," I muttered, unsure whether he grasped English or sense. It seemed to calm him anyway. Eyelids drooped. "Spray-coated everything now. Salt lines drying white on greatcoats. To starboard, smoke from a burning oil dump curled into the sky, blackening clouds that needed no help to look ominous. A gull wheeled overhead, shrieking, sound oddly cheerful against distant artillery. Minutes passed, measured by engine beats and the wet slap of hull against wave. My arms cramped around the oar, though rowing was token compared to the outboard's pull. Still, the rhythm mattered, kept the mind from calculations it dared not start. Distance, fuel, Luftwaffe cycles. I stared instead at the minesweeper growing again on the horizon, funnel smoke drifting leeward like a beckoning finger. Behind us, the beach receded to a blur. Yet even as it shrank, I could still pick out the line of waiting men, fresh ones stepping up to gaps we'd left, helmets shimmering like a school of fish turning as one. The sight needled me, a guilt wrapped in admiration. Rescue here was unending relay, every boat a stitch, every cue a wound reopening before it healed. The minesweeper flashed an Aldous lamp. Dash, dash, dot, dash. Permission to approach. The coxswain answered with handheld shutter. We altered course, engine tone dropping a key as he throttled back. "Keep heads down," he shouted. "Pom-poms twitchy today. Don't fancy loose rounds through the wheelhouse." We glided into lee of the larger vessel. Her hull dwarfed us, rust streaks like dried tears down plates. Sailors lined rails, throwing heaving lines, fenders bobbing between steel and wood. The smell, diesel, wet rope, boiler soot hit like memory of Portsmouth docks on embarkation day, sunny and innocent, felt a lifetime off. As grapnels caught, the ratings above began hoisting stretchers 2 at a time. I steadied each load, boots slipping on slime of seaweed clinging to the hull. Up they went, disappearing over the rail to the unknown of sickbay or deck space, but at least off water. The clerk looked at me, pain cutting through morphine haze. I managed a thin smile. Boat across, not far now. That lie again, maybe bargain rather than falsehood. I'd believe it if he would. When the last casualty disappeared, I glanced round. Space beneath planks where our ankles had waded now ran deeper. Bilge water climbed. The overloaded gig had done its turn, but another run would test luck past breaking. The coxswain met my eyes, one brow raised. As if reading the same ledger of risk, he said, "Steel hulls safer than splinters, lad. Time we handed this crate off and found another with fewer holes." I nodded, but a knot twisted inside. The beach still crawled with figures, smaller now, yet each a pulse of life, waiting its chance. Leaving meant survival, and knowing others might not get theirs. Conflict thick as tar in my throat. A bosun shouted from the rail, "Boat secured! Crew come up!" I slung rifle, glanced once more at the horizon clouded by smoke and gulls, then took the wading rope ladder. Halfway up, I felt the gig lurch below as waves tugged her against fenders. A last shiver, like a dog shaking water before sleep. When my boots thudded onto steel deck, relief and sorrow mingled so closely I couldn't name the difference. Above, gray skies pressed low, but a lighter stroke of color hinted evening would bring a sunset, perhaps even stars later if smoke cleared. I dared imagine those stars over English fields, hedgerows, perhaps a pub sign creaking in summer breeze. Not yet, though. First another run, another queue, another boat, until none remained. A whistle cut through thoughts, the bosun again waving us aft for tea and orders. I followed, boots clanging, heart already leaning seaward toward the next perilous crossing. Somewhere beyond the funnels came the rhythmic clang of the ship's bell marking time. Each peal reminded me we still owned minutes to fight with, and hope enough to spend them dearly. Steam curled from the enamel mug, carrying a faint promise of tannin and condensed milk, too weak to mask the reek of diesel, cordite, and vomit that ruled the minesweeper's deck. I cupped the brew in both hands anyway, letting the heat bleed into fingers stiff from salt, and stared over the rail where wooden gigs still ferried fresh souls from the smoke-blurred beach. They looked impossibly fragile down there, bobbing like matchboxes in dirty froth, each impact against our hull booming up through steel plates and ribs alike. Somewhere below, Harry lay in what passed for sick bay, really just a cleared corner by the galley bulkhead, lit by a single red lamp. A stoker had promised he still breathed, morphine dripping slow through rubber tubing scavenged from a fuel line. I told myself I'd check on him before we made the dash for home, as though time were a polite thing you could schedule. A petty officer marched down the starboard walkway shouting numbers, displacement, draft, margin, his voice steadily losing conviction with each shouted ton. By his reckoning, we carried 4 times the load a ship our size should. No one argued. Mathematics felt obscene when men clung to deck fittings like barnacles. Whistles shrilled. Deckhands cast off the lurching gigs, tossing lines back to crews already turning shoreward for another lift. The engine room telegraph rang, clanged again, ahead slow, and boilers thumped awake beneath our boots. A tremor passed through the hull, subtle but sure, the way a big dog shivers water from its coat before a run. Through the lifting haze, I spied the beach one last time. The snake of khaki coils still writhing, punctuated by fresh geysers where shells walked lazily inland. A church bell tolled again, distant, stubborn. It sounded like farewell. The sweepers formed column. Ahead steamed a trawler converted for mines, her mast festooned with aerials and laundry drying all at once. Astern, a paddle steamer crowded to the gunwales. Beyond her, 2 French destroyers patched with hastily welded plate. We turned west, bows tasting the choppy channel. Across gray water slanted the sun, mean and low, limning each crest silver. Within 10 minutes, the coast blurred into gauzy smudge. Someone beside me exhaled, like he'd been holding breath since Belgium. I found myself believing, truly believing, that we might slip the noose. Then, a lookout on the forecastle pointed skyward, arm rigid. Dots. Initially mere pepper flecks, then black crucifixes against bruised clouds. 9, a dozen. Stukas, sliding out of altitude with the eerie deliberation of falling guillotines. Their sirens ignited, that dreadful, mocking wail rolling ahead of them like blunt spearheads. "All hands take cover," Thirst Lieutenant bellowed, voice wind-whipped thin. On instinct, I crouched behind a ventilator cowling slick with spray, mug forgotten, tea sloshing onto deck. Across the way, a Bren gunner swung his weapon skyward, waiting for the dive angle to steepen. The Stukas tipped. I saw bomb racks disgorge silver eggs that tumbled end over end, slow as thoughts, before vanishing below the starboard bow of the lead trawler. An eye blink later, the sea erupted, white towers spearing higher than her masthead. Shock waves slapped our hull, rattling teeth. Shrapnel hissed down like hail, clanging off steel, buzzing past ears. Our own guns answered, Orlikon and Lewis, rattling in frantic counter-rhythm. Tracers dull in daylight still marked a furious geometry across the sky. One Stuka shed a wingtip, spiraled seaward trailing smoke. The rest bored in, loosing pairs of bombs before clawing back into cloud. A near miss lifted us bodily. Floors bucked under boots, mugs skittered, men cursed God and physics. Water sluiced the deck, carrying away a stack of rifles propped by the hatch. I lunged, snatched one as it slithered. The others sailed overboard, wood and steel spinning together before vanishing. By the second attack run, discipline had buckled to reflex. Wounded on stretchers writhed as splinters peppered them. Able men flattened wherever they could. I pressed cheek to cold plate, salt spray hammering my back, heartbeat drumming in my ears louder than twin V-12 engines screaming overhead. The enemy pulled off eventually, low on ordnance or fuel, but left a chaos of foam and oil behind. The lead trawler drifted, bow sheared open, stem pointing at the sky like a dying whale's jaw. Men clung to railings. Some jumped into burning slick because staying aboard looked worse. Our minesweeper wove past, tossing kegs and lifebelts, but there was no stopping. Orders crackled down, maintain speed, keep channel clear, rescue craft coming astern. We pressed on, decks awash, funnels belching black, the wind tasted of burnt fish oil and cordite. Every man glanced skyward between breaths, waiting for the next chorus. None came. Stuka's gone for now, but dusk gathered, thickening clouds the color of bruises. In their shadows slid new threats, sleek outlines hugging wave-tops, E-boats loosing torpedoes. One hissed under our port quarter, so close the wake slapped hull plates and sprayed phosphor blue. Another found a paddle steamer 2 cables abeam. A deep boom rolled across the chop, followed by screams pitched higher than the wind. Her paddles froze mid-turn. She listed, fire-licking promenade deck bright as carnival lights gone mad. Our skipper ordered zigzag pattern. The helmsman swung the wheel, port 10, starboard 15, engines surging, then easing. The deck's mad waltz kept blood dancing in joints turned to lead. I caught the rail, knuckles whitening, eyes stinging with diesel sleet. Behind us the steamer's silhouette sagged, funnel tilting like a snapped neck. I thought of the brass band that must once have played holiday tunes on that very deck, and felt a sudden sting sharper than spray. Below, Harry. I shoved aft, shoulder to shoulder through knots of men praying into steel helmets, down a ladder slick with oil into the warm dim of sickbay. The red lamp swung wildly to the ship's motion, painting wounds in hell glow. Harry lay pale, lips cracked, but his eyes found mine. "Still afloat, then?" he croaked. "Just," I said. "Wobblier than a newborn foal, but afloat." Another vibration shuddered through bulkheads, dull thump forward this time. The medic glanced overhead, jaw muscle twitching. "Forward hold flooded," a runner called down, voice shaking. "We're trimming by the head." Orders followed hard on. Jettison non-essential weight. Ammunition lockers emptied. Depth charges rolled overside with hollow splashes. I helped carry crates up, each step steeper as the bow settled. Sweat stung the cut on my forearm, reopened by the hoist. Night fell sudden as a shutter. Searchlights from distant destroyers swept sea lanes, carving silver corridors through black. Somewhere to northeast Dover, light winked faint, a firefly promise of home. Our minesweeper never reached that glitter. A lookout shouted, "Torpedo track dead ahead," phosphor gleams slicing water. Telegrapher rang, hard starboard, full ahead, but physics sneered. We heeled, engines thundered, and for a breath I thought we'd cheat fate again. The hit came amidships, port side. I felt it through boot soles before ears registered sound. Deep, belling, final. Steel buckled with a wrenching shriek. Deck planks sprang like trapdoors. Steam geysered from ruptured pipes. The world pivoted. Gravity chose new directions on a whim. Air fled lungs. I landed on my back, stars firing behind eyes. When focus returned, the bow was gone, submerged to the breakwater. Water frothed up companionways, pouring like spilt ale. Calls of abandoned ship mingled with hoarse prayers and the hiss of escaping steam. The deck canted 30 degrees, sliding boots toward railings. I staggered to sick bay ladder, but the companionway yawned black, already half filled by icy channel. A wave punched through, sluicing corpses and crates alike. I shouted Harry's name, voice swallowed by roar. No answer rose. Another shudder, sharper. The foremast cracked, toppled, rigging whipping like live wire. Men hurled themselves clear. One disappeared under timber with a sound too soft for how final it felt. Cold wind slapped my face, snapping thought back to the single instinct left: up. I clambered toward afterrail, dodging loose depth-charge frames, sidestepping a pool of flaming fuel dancing across planks. A boiler rat staggered beside me, both arms burned raw. We locked elbows, each half dragging the other till we found the taffrail teetering high over black water. Below, Carly floats and hammocks already thronged. Voices cried for space that didn't exist. The ship's own prop wash churned debris and bodies into a lethal stew. I tasted salt and soot on every breath, stomach rolling against ribs. "Jump, you fool!" someone screamed behind. Maybe at me, maybe at himself. Another explosion. Secondary. Boiler or magazine boomed, blowing heat past ears. The deck lurched sharper, rail angled underfoot. I gripped cold steel, felt its tremor like a dying heartbeat, and understood the minesweeper would not argue long with the sea. Somewhere in the smoke roar mix, a bell rang one frantic peal. Engine room alarm, or perhaps that stubborn church tower throwing a last note across impossible distance. Either way, it tolled in my skull, urging the same choice. I filled lungs with salt-stung air, shut eyes against sparks and spray, and launched over the side into darkness that smelled of cold iron and forever. Water swallowed the scream before it left my throat. One heartbeat, I fell through oily smoke. The next, I was deep in bruise-cold darkness, limbs flailing at nothing. Shock clamped my chest, a vice of liquid ice. My greatcoat ballooned, dragged me downward. I kicked, boots heavy, useless, fought a panic, older than language. Salt punched into sinuses, burned throat. I surfaced amid floating wreckage, gulped air that tasted of diesel and metal filings, and spun to find which way was up in a world suddenly stripped of horizons. The minesweeper loomed, half submerged. Her stern still rode high, screws sopping air, but the bow had vanished beneath an angry boil. Orange fire licked from hatches, reflected in slicks that spread like bruises. Men clung to lifelines along the afterdeck, silhouettes jerking as the rail dipped closer to black water. An officer on the quarterdeck still shouted orders, voice ragged, words lost in steam, and for an absurd instant I thought the sea might pity him and hold the ship upright. Then the hull gave a long iron groan, like a cathedral beam finally giving way, and the stern slid under, slow as a kneeling giant. A suction wave tugged at me, pulling hard enough that ribs creaked. I clawed at a wooden hatch cover drifting nearby, fingers numb on splintered edge. The current spun me once, twice, then released. Where the minesweeper had been, only swirling froth remained, dotted with debris, drums, crates, a signal lamp still blinking fitfully before shorting into sparks. Something thumped my shoulder, a body, face down, greatcoat bloated, reflex shoved it away, guilt followed on the same breath. Another shape bobbed nearer, coughing water, fingers pawing at the air. I kicked toward him, braced the hatch cover between us. "Grab on!" Whether he heard or simply felt wood under palm, I couldn't tell, but his hand locked tight, nails white crescents. Minutes blurred into something viscous, measured only by breath and the sting of salt in split lips. The night had gone black on black, moon smothered by cloud bank. Yet every few seconds red fireballs bloomed where ships burned farther down the column. Brief lanterns revealing the riot of flotsam and flailing men. Screams carried oddly, rising and falling with the swell, then cutting off as cold or fuel-slicked waves closed over mouths. Cold seeped through every layer. I tried counting strokes, kick, kick, breathe, to keep muscles working, but legs cramped, toes curled numb inside boots. The man sharing my hatch cover muttered something, French, maybe prayer, maybe curse. His head lolled. I shook his shoulder. Stay awake. No reply. Only the dull clink of his helmet against wood. Above, new engines snarled, a low, predatory buzz. Searchlights stabbed from destroyers still afloat, cones of light jittering across water. Within one beam, Heinkel silhouettes appeared, torpedo bombers hunting stragglers. Flak puffs blossomed, thunder rolled across surf. One plane flared, wings sheared by shellfire, tumbling into the sea with a splash vast enough to rock our makeshift raft. A momentary cheer lifted from somewhere, but it sounded small, ridiculous against the scale of night. Spray carried the stink of burning oil. Each breath coated throat in bitterness. My left arm throbbed where shrapnel had sliced it earlier. Salt kept the wound alight. Fingers no longer obeyed fully. I shifted grip, hooked crook of elbow over hatch frame, let weight hang there to spare numb hands. Eyes drifted closed on their own. I forced them open, fixed stare on the nearest blaze, a downed tanker perhaps, its deck cargo turning sky orange. Light meant direction, direction meant survival. Waves heaved, slapped. Sometimes crest lifted us high enough that I glimpsed distant shore, a darker line against lesser dark, punctuated by muzzle flashes in dunes. Once, unmistakably, the toll of that church bell crossed the water, single stubborn note. It sounded nearer than it should. Realization cut colder than sea. Tide and wind were dragging us back toward Dunkirk. Another clump of wreckage drifted close. An intact Carly float, half swamped but buoyant. I lunged, hooked arm through its netting, hauled until chest cleared water. The Frenchman slipped from the hatch cover, face slack. I rested him onto the float beside me. The effort stole breath like a punch to lungs, but once aboard he coughed and retched seawater. Life, flickering, fragile, yet life. Wind shifted, freshening from southwest. Spray became spindrift, needling cheeks. Clouds parted brief seconds, revealing a ragged moon that silvered breaker tops and turned oil patches to jittering mirrors. In that fickle light, I counted more figures clinging to debris. 5, 10, maybe 15 within hail, each isolated by chop and exhaustion. No power left to join, let alone organize. Somewhere behind, A destroyer's klaxon bellowed 3 notes. Engines roared, screws thrashing, searchlights swept low, picking out survivors. But more bombers dove, and the destroyer heeled hard, guns barking. Her captain chose motion over rescue. He had to. White spray fountained from his bow. His wake rocked us cruelly, then dwindled. Time became an enemy. The longer I floated, the deeper cold drove, nibbling muscle, clogging thoughts. I tried listing things I loved: mother's Sunday roast, smell of hop vats along the river, Harry's lousy harmonica. But memories slipped, frost shattered. I shook my head, felt ice crusting lashes. The Frenchman stirred. Mutter, turning to words. Froid. Si froid. I answered nonsense. Encouragement in English he likely didn't grasp, yet the sound of human voice stoked something warm inside the chest, enough to keep teeth from chattering apart. Clouds thickened again. Firelight dwindled as wrecks sank or burned down to waterline, leaving dark absolute. Drizzle fell, fine as dust. The float rode lower. Each wavelet seeped through lashing, pooling around the hips until numbness masked cold. Out of blackness a shape loomed, a fishing smack, mast intact, sail furled. She wallowed under jury-rig and luck, decks crowded with men waving torches too weak to carry far. I mustered a shout, raw and thin. Torchlight swung, paused, then blinked twice. A dinghy appeared overside, rowed by 2 shadows, lantern bobbing at bow. It creaked closer, voices urging us to hang on. When the dinghy reached, fresh arms heaved my companion aboard first. I followed, legs refusing command, body moving on habit alone. The oarsman asked names. I gave mine around chattering teeth. They thrust a blanket, smelling of wet wool and herring, over shoulders, pulled for the smack. Her deck felt miraculous, solid, pitching in long, lazy arcs compared to swim's chaos. Men swarmed, some soldiers, some fishermen and jumpers caked with tar, one Wren radio operator soaked to bone. They eased us against gunwale, pressed enamel mugs of rum-laced tea into shaking hands. The liquid scorched throat, lit belly with a small, defiant fire. Someone asked about ships astern. I shook my head. Another pointed toward the shore, now clearly nearer than open sea. Dunkirk's low skyline flickered under shell bursts. "Tide's turning against us," the skipper growled. "Rudder's jury-rigged, can't claw off till dawn," which meant we'd drift back toward the maelstrom we'd fled, circling like flies over a candle no one could snuff. Weariness settled deeper than chill, but rum chased it enough to think. I peered into darkness, where other little ships navigated blind. Engines hacking, skippers swearing through megaphones, all riding same reluctant tide. Wooden hulls bumped as they jostled for position, fenders squealing like pigs in pens. Somewhere across water, a trumpet played, 2 wavering bars of "Roll Out the Barrel," before laughter and coughs cut it short. The Frenchman, Paul, I learned, sat beside me, blanket round shoulders, lips muttering rosary. He met my gaze, managed a weak smile. This fragile fellowship, a deck, a blanket, shared shiver, felt like wealth. Above, engines returned. Not bombers this time, but RAF Hurricanes, twin lines of exhaust scribbling across first hint of dawn. Their growl drew ragged cheers from every boat within earshot. I watched them fade toward the German positions, guns already twinkling at unseen ground targets, and felt a spark of vindication. Yet my thoughts slid aft, to the minesweeper's sickbay, swallowed whole, to Harry somewhere below, trapped in cold iron halls. Grief rose, but would not form tears. The sea had stolen warmth enough. I pressed fist to eyes, breathed until sorrow settled into a heavy knot that promised to stay. The skipper called orders. Drop anchor, ride out ebb, wait for turn of tide. Men shuffled to tasks, unfurling storm lantern, checking lines, movements stiff and weary yet purposeful. I found a coil of rope, wedged myself against it, blanket tight, and stared east, where first ash-gray light seeped under clouds. In that dim glow, the shoreline emerged, hauntingly close. Dunes scalloped like dark teeth, wreckage standing sentinel in shallows. I heard, faint but certain, the church bell strike once, then once again. Distance couldn't mute it. Water carried the note like a vein carries blood. The beach awaited our return, whether we willed it or not. I closed eyes against wind, felt smack rise and fall, canvas rigging creak overhead. Dawn would bring a new tide, another attempt, fresh peril. For now the channel rocked us in uneasy lullaby, cold, stern, but alive. And somewhere in that rhythmic heave, I promised Harry, promised myself, that if daylight gave a second chance, I'd ride it out of hell no matter how many times the sea dragged me back. The tide began its sly return just after first light, an invisible hand loosening the smack's anchor rope, coaxing the hull to swing until her battered bow pointed back toward the gray smudge of land we'd fled. I felt the shift through the deck before anyone spoke. Timbers that had rested uneasy through the night now creaked in a new, reluctant rhythm, like a horse turning toward a stable it hates. The skipper cursed under his breath, peering at the shoreline through a dented pair of binoculars. If we had 3 feet more water under the keel and half a rudder that listened, we'd be across by breakfast, he muttered. The channel, ever contrary, offered neither. His improvised tiller, 2 boat hooks lashed with signal halyard, could nudge us but not fight a current that knew its own mind. Around us, the other little craft wrestled the same maths. Some kicked against the floe with sputtering engines, their wash frothing white, but making scant headway. Others let themselves drift, hoping to lie low until engineers cleared a channel through the mines, or until destroyers found courage or room to sweep in again. Over the water rolled a low chorus of coughs and clanks, canvas flapping, men swearing in 3 languages at the stubborn sea. By mid-morning the dunes had risen from smudge to certainty, dark humps pocked by last night's shell holes, flags of smoke still climbing from gutted lorries. The tolling bell carried sharper now, a cracked iron note that seemed to measure our failure, 1 clang for every mile surrendered. The skipper ordered sail run up, not to race forward, he said, but to keep steerage way long enough to choose where we grounded. Better to beach her on open sand than smash against the eastern mole. I helped haul the damp canvas aloft, hands raw on rope, shoulders protesting with every heave. The Frenchman, Paul, worked beside me, color returning to cheeks now that rum and sunrise warmed his bones. We shared a grim half-smile, that wordless pact made by men who know the day is bent on trouble and intend to meet it standing. Wind filled the sail with a limp thud. The smack answered, canting eastward. Whitecaps slapped her bow, throwing spray that traced salt on chapped lips. I tasted it and thought of Harry again, of steel bulkheads closing around him in the dark water, and forced the picture away before it finished forming. Grief had a habit of freezing limbs worse than channel chill. The nearer we came, the clearer the beach's new geometry emerged. Yesterday's lines had dissolved into ragged clusters, men digging fresh scrapes, stretcher teams hauling bodies into neat rows, gun crews uncrating ammunition for pieces sighted among dune grass. A lone Bren carrier, half sunk in a bomb crater, spewed black smoke that flattened in the onshore breeze. Now and then a Stuka shrieked out of the overcast, dropped its load, and hauled skyward trailing flak bursts, routine as gulls by this point. Each detonation sent a ripple along the beach, helmets ducking, then straightening as soon as the siren faded, as though fear itself had acquired punctuation. We threaded through a fringe of wreckage, an upturned lifeboat, a metal locker, a field kitchen floating belly up like a beetle. Then the keel thumped sand. The smack lurched and stuck, bow aimed at a gap between two half-sunken truck chassis. The skipper doused sail, wiped sweat with a sleeve. "Right, lads, over we go. Grab anything isn't nailed and see if those officers on shore can still count." A plank went over the side. I slung my blanket, tightened belt 3 notches to stop my trousers falling from salt-soaked sag, and splashed into thigh-deep surf. The water felt warmer than night had made it, though that might have been the cold already sunk so deep I'd lost scale. Behind, Paul followed, cradling a wicker basket someone insisted held the last of the tea tins. Boots found purchase on single, each step squelched. Wet sand climbed socks, grit rasping every seam. My rifle, rescued from the minesweeper's deck before she went under, banged against spine, barrel clogged with salt crust. Onshore reception proved brisk rather than warm. A lieutenant with week-old stubble waved us behind a line of pickets hammered into the tide flat. He pointed to heaps of Bren magazines, petrol tins, folded stretchers. "Form details, shift those above high water, then dig. Moles under barrage, main lift stalled, so we hold here till dark." His voice carried the patience of a man who'd given the same order to 18 boatloads already. I set the rifle on a pile, took a stretcher handle. Paul grabbed the other end. We slogged up the beach, surf hissing behind, gulls gawking overhead. The sand farther up was drier, coarser, scuffed by thousands of boots. Iron stank in the air, blood and rust mingling with diesel. Stretchers went into a canvas-roofed shelter rigged from tarpaulins and broken signposts. Inside, medics worked over men laid shoulder to shoulder, murmuring to keep them from slipping away. I recognized the clerk we'd ferried earlier, eyes closed, bandage fresh, but no time for greetings. Back down for more gear. Sun hovered behind smeared cloud, lending a washed-out glow that turned every figure to shadow puppet when flares burst overhead. Their light-etched dunes, barbed wire, the jagged skyline of Dunkirk's warehouses, ruins now, walls gaping like pulled teeth. Each pop made the horizon lurch, as if the day kept switching lanterns in a haunted show.
Third run. We fetched petrol tins. My forearm wound reopened, streaks of red across bandage, brown with old salt. Paul tore a strip from his sleeve, wrapped it wordlessly. We carried on. Sweat cut channels through grime on faces. Every breath tasted of smoke. Somewhere, a bagpiper played a snatch of Highland Laddie, the notes skirling oddly jaunty against artillery thunder. When orders finally paused, we found a foxhole waist deep and slid in beside two sappers cleaning a jammed Lewis gun. One offered a tin cup of water, lukewarm, glorious. I took a sip, salt on lips blending with rust of canteen metal. Conversation came slow, broken by coughs and the metallic clink of tools. We spoke of nothing larger than this minute, how long the tide would stay out, whether the Stukas would tire before dusk, how many stretchers still waited by the surf. Larger questions, why the perimeter had folded, whether London still stood, felt obscene, like asking funeral plans while the house still burned. Afternoon blurred into a smear of gray sky and endless labor. Dig, carry, flatten, duck when bombs wailed, repeat. At one point I glanced seaward and counted more wrecks than afloat hulls. Yet among them wooden motor launches still darted, fearless minnows weaving between whale carcasses. One towed an empty lifeboat painted emerald green, fresh reinforcement for tonight's miracle queue. The sight lit a guttering spark. If that little hull had made it through daylight, perhaps darkness would give others a chance. But light lingered cruelly. Late sun slid under cloud shelf, flaring blood orange, picking every dent in helmets, every bullet scar on abandoned trucks. Its beauty felt like mockery, gilding misery so no one could ignore it. Men squinted, curses drifting like midges. The Stukas used the glare as curtain, diving black-silhouetted until last instant. One stick of bombs walked across the shallows, geysers tossing two motor launches skyward in pieces. Spray hammered trench walls, rattling my teeth hard enough to bite tongue. When the shock wave eased, new screams rose, fresh, raw. I risked a glance over sandbag lip. Wreckage bobbed where the launches had been. Between shards, figures thrashed, arms flashing white in sun's dying fire. Without command, lads all along the line sprang up, racing seaward, ropes, ladders, anything that floated. I followed, calves cramping as wet sand clutched boots. Surf foamed pink where dusk light met spilled blood. We dragged 3 men out, maybe 4. One breathed, 2 didn't. The live one clung to my wrist, eyes wild. "Thought it was home," he rasped. We had no reply. We laid the dead above the strand line, tagged them with ration card slips. The living we carried uphill to stretcher station, medics already overrun. Sun dipped, sky softened to gunmetal violet. Wind turned cold again, lifting smoke in ragged banners. Along the dunes, officers lit hooded lamps, red, then doused, then red again, signals to offshore skippers that queues would reform at dark. The lieutenant from earlier limped by, clipboard in hand. Boats start lifting at 2100, staggered every 15 minutes. Keep files 5 abreast, wounded nearest surf. His tone held no hope, only mechanism. Wind a watch, let it tick. I pulled a shovel, joined a line, scraping a fresh slit trench. The action warmed muscles, numbed by sea and grief. Each scoop threw up sand that smelled of salt and cordite, the beach's 2 defining flavors. My shovel struck metal, helmet buried brim down. I pried it free, bullet hole clean through, no skull beneath, thank God, just sand. Even so, I flung it aside quick, as though thought alone might summon its owner's ghost. Dusk deepened, gulls fled inland. The bell in that shattered church rang once, twice, then stopped. Perhaps the bell rope finally snapped, or the belfry joined the rest of the ruin. In the hush that followed, I caught a new sound. Distant engines, dozens humming in chorus. Not Luftwaffe, it lacked that predatory pitch. This was lower, varied, civilian, almost curious. We scrambled up the dune crest. Beyond breaking surf, silhouettes multiplied. Motor launches, river tugs, cabin cruisers with bunting hastily ripped down, Dutch shits, even what looked like a paddleboard lashed to an outboard motor. Their navigation lights hooded, bows tilting in quick chop, they advanced like patient ants, undeterred by flotsam and fading light. One skipper swung a lantern in slow arc, acknowledging the shore, daring the guns. Beside me, Paul made the sign of the cross. My own pulse hammered. The little ships were coming again. More than last night, more than dawn. For a crazy beat, I believed I could hear voices across the water. Fishermen joking about queues, bank clerks swearing at clogged carburetors, weekend sailors reciting St. Crispin. Behind us, the lieutenant's whistle cut the hush. 3 blasts, then 2. Men sprang to lines, reforming ranks. Rifle slings squeaked, helmets clinked. Music of rehearsed desperation. I hefted my battered Enfield, sand grinding in action, and stepped into place beside Paul. The engines offshore grew louder, converging with surf into one broad roar. Searchlights from a surviving destroyer carved white lanes behind the flotilla, daring aircraft to try their luck. Far off, artillery flickered. German gunners adjusting for night but firing blind now. Shells whined overhead, splashing wide, angry but unsure. I tasted salt on cracked lips, felt wet sand cold through soles, and braced. Night's second act was about to begin. Little ships against the tide, hope against arithmetic. The queue inched forward, each step an unspoken prayer. And somewhere, beyond the breakers, lanterns bobbed like distant stars, beckoning us once more into the dark water's gamble. Engines throbbed just beyond the surf line, scores of them, overlapping notes weaving a rough and ready fugue. In the dark, each hull showed only a low silhouette and the warm oval of a wheelhouse window painted red to save night sight. They came on in ragged procession, bows thudding through chop, exhausts coughing sparks that flickered like fireflies under the star-blotted sky. We met them knee-deep, water numbingly cold, sleeves rolled and shoulders braced against the backwash. A petty officer in oilskins leapt from the first launch, lamp hooded in one hand, boat hook in the other. "Stretchers to starboard, rifles stacked port, keep the center line clear," he barked in a Southampton accent thick enough to slice. Nobody quibbled. These were orders that smelled of leaving. Paul and I waded alongside a corporal whose left hand was bandaged to a splint fashioned from bayonet scabbards. He clutched his Lewis gun with the other as though it were the family silver. Spray burst against chests, soaked pockets. Starlight caught the gun's oil film and made it look half mythic, half useless. The corporal muttered a prayer to Mary, then switched halfway to his mum's name, couldn't decide which higher power to call. The launch grounded with a juddering scrape. Men lunged to steady her while breakers slapped the transom. A plank appeared, 2 beach stakes and a door ripped from some ruined cafe near the harbor. "Mind the gap," someone laughed, instantly swallowed by a mortar thump inland. The door flexed under first weight, but it held. The stretcher parties went first, white-faced lads wrapped in blankets already stiff with dried seawater. We passed them, hand over hand, up the plank, each transfer punctuated by the surf's hiss, and once by the scream of a Stuka prowling above the cloud deck. Its siren wailed, bombs splashed harmlessly offshore, yet every back on the beach arched tight until the echo died. Our turn. Paul crossed ahead, tea-tins clinking in that basket like fool's gold. I followed, boots skating on planks made frictionless by algae and nerves. The launch smelled of paraffin, wet rope, and optimism so raw it bordered on panic. Inside, benches already cramped, seamen shoving packs beneath thwarts to make knee room. A mate thrust life jackets our way, kapok vests stained with bilge. Tie in front, snug but not strangling. The knot felt different from army rigging. 2 half hitches, a tug, the quick bend sailors trust. I fumbled, Paul fastened mine with a steadying pat on the shoulder. Overhead, a coastal battery flashed, sending orange pulses across sky. Moments later, shells moaned seaward, flowering useless geysers among distant silhouettes. The enemy seemed as eager to smash wooden pleasure boats as he'd been to gut destroyers. A dark joke circulated. Fritz was an egalitarian gunner. He despised everyone equally. Another craft nosed in, then a third. Each fresh arrival bred a new queue, lit by shuttered lamps dipped low to avoid drawing aircraft eyes. The beach became a rainfall of whispered numbers, 30 aboard here, 25 there, officers juggling weight and waterline like hawkers with plates. Somehow, discipline held. A wounded Coldstreamer fainted in line. The lads behind simply stepped round, bearing him gently so the column never broke stride. At last, the petty officer hollered, "Cast off!" Ropes splashed free. The little launch slid stern first under oar power until her propeller cleared sand. Then throttle opened, an eager snarl, and we pivoted seaward. Moonlight gilt the foam curling off either quarter. Otherwise, the world stayed ink black, dotted by occasional pinpricks where cigarettes flared despite strict orders. Within minutes, the beach shrank behind us, a murmuring smear of lanterns bracketed by muzzle flashes. From this distance, the queues looked like earthworms laid on pewter, writhing but unbroken. I wondered how many of them I'd queued alongside yesterday, how many would live to queue again tomorrow,
and whether tomorrow even existed outside this strip of half-ruined coast. The launch's coxswain, a middle-aged man with white at his temples and a yachting club badge still pinned to his guernsey, called back, "Keep low amidships, lads. Germans love a silhouette." He throttled up until the engine rattled teeth. Spray arced over bow. Those without tarpaulin found themselves baptized anew. Nobody complained. It tasted like forward motion. We zigzagged among shapes half seen. A Thames tug lugging 3 lifeboats in train, a Cornish trawler whose mast carried drying washing alongside the white ensign, a pleasure cruiser named Jolly Jane with deck awning ripped away. Each skipper signaled the others with torch blinks. Semaphore whipped off in hasty spurts. Shoals here, wreckage there, mind the sandbank bearing 260. It felt like stumbling into some clandestine guild whose password was sheer bloody nerve. Mid-channel of the roadstead, the coxswain throttled back. Ahead, a tall shadow resolved. The slate outline of a steam drifter acting as mothership. Her decks were already packed. Men perched on railings, crouched atop winch housings, even straddled the funnel's stays. We glided alongside with the delicacy of a thief easing open a jewelry case. Boats bumped, fenders squealed. Lads scrambled to fend off floating planks carrying wounded. "Make room for 20 more, a naval officer shouted, voice hoarse. "Hang ropes over the side. No ladder left unbroken." Paul and I gripped manila lines, hauled ourselves upward hand over hand, boots skidding on hull plates weeping condensation. Halfway, my bad arm screamed. I clenched my teeth, shifted weight to legs, kept climbing. A pair of stokers grabbed my webbing, dragged me over the bulwark. Deck space measured in inches. I wedged against a bollard. Paul squeezed beside a signalman. Around us, fresh arrivals collapsed where they landed. No shame, no ceremony. The drifter's engine thudded like a slow heartbeat. She edged ahead, another launch already sliding into the vacancy we'd left. The relay ran smoother now, a factory line of improvised grace. We were barely underway when the Luftwaffe returned. Heinkels this time, droning level between cloud rags, dropping strings of bombs by sound more than sight. Water mushroomed under star shell glare. One column rose so near that spume washed over the bow, drenching everyone forward. Men hugged whatever metal offered hold. I watched a kettle, untethered, roll the length of deck, ricochet off a bulkhead, and fly over the side with a splash absurd amid high explosive. Flak chattered from trawlers, staccato defiance, but mostly the little fleet trusted speed and smallness to cheat the aim of enemy crews. It worked enough. Gaps opened in the rain of steel, and through those gaps, our armada pressed. The coast behind became fire-rimmed darkness. Ahead, farther out, larger silhouettes loomed. Destroyers easing back toward the pickup line, their funnels glowing dull red, bridges silhouettes against searchlight slash. That would be the next leap, the big lift to England proper. Rumor said Ramsgate 1 minute, Margate the next. Nobody cared, so long as it was the right side of the water. A call rippled along deck. Wounded first up the ladder, walking cases second. Drop your kit if ordered. I looked at my rifle, stock cracked, bolt gritty, and felt a pang sharp as hunger. Part of me wanted to keep it. Talisman of every yard survived. Part knew its weight might cost a place.
While I wrestled the dilemma, the decision solved itself. The bolt seized, solid, rust mixing with sand. Useless. I set the weapon gently between hatch combings, a farewell of sorts, and shuffled toward the forward ladder. Paul gripped my shoulder. "See you topside," he said. I nodded, tried to say, "A bientôt," but the phrase snagged behind salt-swollen tongue. Above, signal lamps flashed from the nearest destroyer. "Embark now, max speed, incoming raid." The order cracked like ice. Deck crews sprang. Stretchers hoisted on block and tackle, able-bodied sent scrambling after. The ladder pitched steep. A stoker braced my back with both palms, heaved. I rose one rung, two, metal cold, shoes slipping, until strong hands closed on wrists, hauled me onto the destroyer's deck plates, still warm from boiler heat. A petty officer pointed us aft. "Stow yourselves quick, we're shoving off." Already turbines spooled, a deep growl vibrating through deck soles. I looked down the ladder, Paul emerging, face drawn but eyes alight. Behind him the drifter wallowed lower, freeboard nearly flush with sea. Another blast of aircraft engines Dopplered overhead. Tracer streaks scribbled against star shell light. The race was tipping again. As soon as Paul's boots hit steel, the ladder whipped free, crewmen casting off with practiced snaps. The destroyer's screws bit hard, hull shuddering forward, wake foaming bright white in the gloom. We cleared a burning schooner by yards, spray carrying embers that hissed on deck plates. No one cheered. The mood felt too thin, half disbelief, half dread of what punishment might follow. Men crouched by the rail, clothes dripping, watching the drifter peel away to take more souls, watching the little launches swirl like midges around fresh lanterns. Each of us carried the guilt of leaving someone else behind, balanced against the selfish relief of breathing one breath farther from the shore. The first officer strode the catwalk, voice clipped yet almost gentle. "Down to the mess decks, blankets and cocoa waiting. Keep passages clear. Surgery amidships." His words came filtered through wind and engine din, but reached us nonetheless. Promises small, yet priceless. I turned once more toward Dunkirk. Flames still clawed the sky, but between glare and smoke I glimpsed dozens of tiny navigation lights. Green to starboard, red to port, threading shoreward in steady file, like so many glowworms, undeterred by giants' boots. Engines spooled higher, the destroyer heeled, bow knifing spray. We were leaving, truly leaving. Yet the evacuation behind rolled on, wave after wave of stubborn humanity. I closed eyes, committing the sight to memory in case dawn blurred it away. A constellation of little ships, brave as any battleship, stitching silver thread through black water toward a beach that refused to die quietly. Somewhere ahead lay the open channel, Luftwaffe squadrons, maybe E-boats lurking, but also the faintest scent of English soil riding the wind. I drew it in, let cold air scour lungs, and steadied myself for whatever final gauntlet the night still owed us. The mess decks reverberated with a sound I'd almost forgotten. Laughter. Not the carefree stuff from barracks days, but a brittle, half-mad chortling that burst out whenever someone tasted cocoa too hot for numb lips or discovered a blanket still faintly dry in one corner.
We sat shoulder to shoulder along steel bulkheads that sweated condensation, legs stretched under benches, boots thumping with every roll of the destroyer's hull. Sweat mingled with diesel fumes and the sour tang of soaked wool. But beneath it all lay the first whiff of something kinder. Bread, toasting in a galley somewhere forward. The sharp edge of tea leaves steaming in urns. A rating threaded the aisle with a kettle big as a dustbin, sloshing brown liquid into dented mugs. "Mind your tongues, lads. Burns worse than Fritz," he quipped. And the line rippled with low chuckles. I cradled my mug, let warmth seep through bandaged fingers, and shivered despite it. Paul leaned against my shoulder, eyes closed, lips moving in slow French syllables. Prayer, or perhaps a lullaby, learned long before the Maginot proved mortal. Across from us, the Lewis gun corporal dozed upright, sputtering snores each time the ship's screws cavitated in heavier swell. Above, somewhere past the deckhead, a klaxon sounded 3 short blasts. Conversation stopped as if a valve had been shut. An officer's voice crackled through the speaking tube. "Action stations. Aircraft off port quarter." Tin mugs hit deck gratings. Men scrambled, blankets discarded. Helmets bumped overhead lighting with hollow clangs. I followed the surge up a ladder, lungs searing at the sudden intake of oily air. Topside, the night had curdled into slate-gray pre-dawn. Horizon just beginning to bruise purple. A bitter wind knifed through wet clothes. But no one cared. We wanted sky, wanted to see what hunted us. The destroyer heeled through a breaking wave. Spray sheeted over forecastle rails, salty needles on cheeks already chapped. I tasted Channel brine again and remembered floating beside burning wreckage only hours earlier. Memory sharp enough to sting, but not sharp enough to wound anew. Searchlights from escort trawlers cut swathes through low cloud. Their beams snagged 3 Henkels skimming the wave tops. Silhouettes stark as paper cutouts against gunmetal sky. The destroyer's forward 4-inch roared, tongue of flame, recoil shutter racing along deck plates. Ehrlichens chattered, tracers slashing red-orange stitches whose glow reflected in wide eyes, cycling between terror and hope. The bombers released in shallow glide. I saw the ordnance drop. Dark eggs trailing pale splash lines. "Brace!" someone shouted, but we were already gripping stanchions. Muscles tight. One bomb struck 20 yards off starboard. The column of water towered, slapped the bridge windows, came down as warm rain smelling of cordite. The second whumped under, detonating just abaft our screws. A lurch rolled us almost beam on. Bodies slid. Helmets rattled like hail across deck. Steam burst from a vent in ragged hiss. One boiler feed line torn, judging by the sudden loss of speed. Yet we turned back into the swell, guns still hammering. I caught a glimpse of a Henkel banking too slow, port engine trailing smoke ribbon. Cheers rose, thin, hoarse, desperate. The bomber dipped, found the sea in a sheet of white spray. Its wingtip cartwheeled, fuselage snapped, wreckage swallowed whole within seconds. One less shadow, though the sky held plenty. Below, damage parties swarmed. Seamen in undershirts wading ankle-deep through boil water, clamping valves, dog-locking hatches. The deck plates trembled as turbines spooled afresh. Our sternwash bloomed again, though less fiercely. A petty officer passed word that speed was limited now, 18 knots max. No one complained aloud, but I felt tension coil tighter. 18 was respectable for a Channel ferry, deadly slow for a destroyer threading bomber lanes. Still, we pressed on, smoke from funnels smearing into dawn. The coastline behind shrank into haze, pierced only by the intermittent wink of gunfire. Ahead at last, the far horizon hinted a different hue, paler, cleaner, morning building over England. I leaned outboard, eyes watering in wind, and thought I could smell earth beneath the salt, damp hedgerow, coal fire, maybe the ghost of cut grass. Might have been wishful thinking, but it steadied something inside me all the same. Orders rang down for wounded to be brought topside. Surgery spaces now hot boxes of steam and leaking pipes. I joined a chain passing stretchers up narrow ladders, slick with condensation. The clerk I'd helped drag from surf blinked at me through fever glaze. I squeezed his wrist, felt a weak return. Stokers cleared a patch aft among depth charge rails, lashed stretchers in ranks 3 deep. Spray misted their faces. They blinked but kept working, murmuring jokes about free salt baths. Mid-channel, we fell in with 2 other destroyers, one of them flying tatters where an ensign used to be. Together we formed a wedge, shepherding 3 trawlers and a paddle steamer low in the water, her paddle still, towed now like a wounded dog. Above the formation circled 4 hurricanes, RAF letters black against new light. They weaved lazy S-turns, ready to pounce on anything crossing their patch. The sight drew a spontaneous cheer that rolled deck to deck, but the fighter pilots could not hear. Still, we hollered, waving helmets like midfield fans. Another alarm. This time, E-boats reported dead ahead. The wedge altered 70 degrees starboard in unison. I clutched rail as centrifugal pull tried to throw me broadside. Spray burst over forecastle again. The wounded cried out as salt scalded open flesh. Gun crews tracked nothing I could see. Vast shapes low to water. Perhaps only wakes glimpsed between swells. One trawler let fly with Vickers guns anyway, bullets smacking sea in jitter lines. Whether we drove the wolves off or they slipped behind, I never learned. Moments later, the klaxon cut and engines steadied. By 7:30, the sun-breached cloud, a wan disk veiled by mist. It painted everything drab silver, sea, steel, faces. Then, like a curtain parting, the coast revealed itself. Chalk cliffs streaked gray under overcast. Rooftops of a seaside town nestled in dip between headlands. A single church spire pricking sky. The helmsman announced course change for Dover roads. Cheers this time were subdued, part disbelief, part overwhelming fatigue. A corporal near me whispered, "Nearly home, Harry lad," then caught himself, eyes flicking guilt-struck at my sleeve, where the blood-stiff bandage told its own story. I managed a nod. No words would form. Approach channels bristled with small craft. Tugs, barges, even a yacht flying St. George from the spreader, ferrying men from larger ships laying off. A Navy whaler came alongside to guide us through anti-submarine nets. Her coxswain, a boy could not have been more than 17, called up, "Welcome back, gents." His grin looked too wide for war. Someone tossed him a battered helmet as souvenir. He saluted with it, laughter trailing on wind. We passed beneath Dover's great breakwater, the harbor suddenly calm as a lake, waves reduced to lazy slaps against pilings. Quays were lined 3 deep, stretchers waiting, WVs in starched sleeves, ambulance lorries painted new khaki. A military band stood ready but silent, instruments gleaming mute. Perhaps they'd learned noise unsettled men fresh from the line. Instead, only gulls cried overhead, their white shapes wheeling against chalk. Sound uncanny echo of Stuka's scream, yet creepily comforting here. The destroyer eased astern, springs taking strain, hull kissing timber piles with a hollow thud. Lines flew, capstans clanked, the telegraph rang, finished with engines. Vibrations that had gripped bones since the minesweeper vanished, now faded, leaving strange emptiness, as though legs expected deck to tremble forever. Gangway out. Naval police shouted for order, civilian nurses waved towels, white flags of truce against lingering fear. The lieutenant who'd shepherded us on the beach strode the deck, voice hoarse but firm. Wounded first, regiment by regiment. Hand over weapons at the brow. Move smartly. He paused before me, glanced at my bandaged arm. You'll need that looked at, son. I nodded, feeling suddenly 12. Paul squeezed my forearm. La fin? He asked. I followed his gaze ashore. Ambulance doors yawning wide, kettles steaming on trestle tables, a Salvation Army banner sagging in still air. Not quite the end, I thought, just the gate. But words failed, so I gave him a weary thumbs up. The queue shuffled forward, rifle slings clinking, boots on steel treads, breath clouds mingling in the crisp coastal air. Ahead, a nurse's voice drifted. Tea, love. Plenty for everyone. The word plenty felt foreign, extravagant. I tasted salt on cracked lips, could almost believe it might be washed away by whatever waited beyond the quay. My foot found the first step of the gangway. The rail was warm from morning sun, oddly gentle against palm. Behind me, engines of other ships throbbed. Whistles signaled docking, chains rattled, the evacuation still in motion, a great living machine none of us would forget. I drew a breath deep enough to hurt cracked ribs, stepped down toward English planks that smelled faintly of creosote and promise. And for a moment, before the orderly barked the next command, time seemed to balance on that narrow gangway, past on one side, unimagined future on the other. The channel wind blowing through every memory like church bells tolling the final note over gray, forgiving surf. My boots touched the timber step. One soft tap, then another, and for the first time in days, I heard no echo of gunfire behind the sound. The gangway flexed under weight, creaking like a violin string tuned too low. Halfway down, I smelled bacon from a mess tent on the quay, sweet and greasy, and the scent almost buckled my knees more than the sea ever had. A nurse met me at the foot of the ramp, uniform crisp, hands stained with tannin from ladling tea. Her smile trembled at the edges, brave in spite of whatever she'd already seen that morning. She guided my bandaged arm into a fresh sling, dabbed iodine where salt had kept the wound honest, and pressed a tin cup against my palm. Steam fogged the air between us. Take your time, she said. The gentleness in her voice felt indecent after the beach, yet welcome all the same. I tried to thank her, but words snagged behind a sudden lump, so I lifted the cup instead. The first sip tasted of boiled socks and heaven. Q formed again. Of course it did. Britain runs on Qs. But this one moved toward warmth rather than water. An army clerk noted my name, regiment, rifle number. I confessed its funeral at sea. He waved the apology away. Another lad stuck a chalk mark on my shoulder. Blue for ambulatory wounded. Past the table, a girl guide, no more than 14, offered a biscuit tin. I took one out of duty, found myself crying into its crumbly edges before I'd finished chewing. From the quay, we filed through an archway cut into Dover's ancient stone. The tunnel lamped with hurricane lanterns that threw moth-flitting shadows along wet walls. Somewhere above on the cliff top, anti-aircraft crews kept watch. Their boots thudded overhead now and then, a reminder that England's safety was still conditional. The tunnel opened onto railway sidings. A string of carriages waited, Red Cross flags draped from windows, engines puffing low like sheep after a long hill. Porters in flat caps hustled stretchers. Chaplains murmured blessings, voices catching on smoke. I felt the platform's steady immobility underfoot. No tilting deck, no sucking tide, and had to adjust my balance as though the earth itself were a new invention. They shepherded us into third-class compartments, smelling of ancient leather and coal dust. Paul ended up across the aisle, fingers tapping rosary rhythm on his knee. When the guard's whistle shrieked, we flinched. Habit. Then laughed at our own nerves. The locomotive gathered itself, jerked forward, wheels clicking a tempo that settled nerves better than any morphine. Home. 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 Fields unrolled outside. Hedgerows flushed spring green despite gray skies. Sheep lifted indifferent heads at the thunder of wheels. I pressed my forehead to glass cooled by slipstream and watched England drift past like a silent film. Cricket pitch nets flapping in wind, a pub sign creaking, laundry pegged in neat lines. Each vision felt both intimately mine and impossibly exotic, as though I'd crossed more than the channel, some border between worlds. Conversation rose. Late afternoon, the train braked into a siding outside a sprawling red brick hospital. Orderlies guided us through doors heavy enough to stop artillery, into corridors painted buttercream and smelling of disinfectant so strong it stripped the channel from my nostrils. Beds lined every hall, too many bodies for wards alone. Nurses moved among them like moths, chart sheets fluttering from clipboards. They parked me on a cot beneath a placard reading mild trauma, watch for shock, then cutaway dressings, tutted at salt rash, stitched to section the C head kept open. The doctor asked questions. Any dizziness, any nausea, name, rank, serial. I answered on autopilot. He finished with, next of kin to notify, private. I opened my mouth, but Harry's sister's address surfaced instead of my own mother's. I gave both. It felt important someone told them the truth, whatever that turned out to be. Evening settled. Ward lights dimmed to carbide glow. Outside, sirens wailed for a coastal alert, but no bombs followed. Perhaps Jerry had worn himself thin for one day. In the lull, I drifted toward sleep, only to be nudged awake by footsteps. A Red Cross volunteer, spectacles fogged, hands ink-smudged, held a clipboard. "Telegram for Jenkins, Arthur?" "That's me." He handed over a flimsy. I unfolded it with fingers clumsy from stitches. "Harry Evans safe. Picked up by fishing smack. Amputation successful. Stable. Stop. Writing soon. Matron, Evac Hospital, Kent." Sound drained from the ward. I read the lines twice, thrice. The knot of guilt I'd nursed since the minesweeper loosened didn't vanish, but slackened enough to breathe through. I pressed the paper to forehead, whispered thanks to whatever patron saint covers stubborn scousers and fishing smacks. Sleep finally came, deep, anchor-heavy. But dawn prized my eyes open with birdsong drifting through an open transom. Real birds, not gulls fighting over ration tins. Sunlight lay on the blanket like a warm hand. For 5 heartbeats I lay still, letting the ordinary beauty hurt in the best possible way. Rounds began. Porridge dolloped into enamel bowls, tea poured, temperature charts clipped. During dressing change, the nurse grinned at my telegram. "Miracles, 2 a penny this week," she said. "Whole countries run out of disbelief." I grinned back, and the motion pulled the scabs at mouth corners in a way that felt almost like happiness. That afternoon, they led us into the courtyard. Bandaged parade, hobbling behind walking sticks and borrowed crutches. The smell of lilac hung thick over brick walls. A gramophone near the fountain played Vera Lynn singing "We'll Meet Again," needle crackling on each swell. Some lads winced, memory too raw, but most of us stood silent, letting the lyric settle where words of our own couldn't reach. I found a bench beneath a chestnut tree, its candles just past bloom. Closed my eyes, felt sun on eyelids crimson bright, and listened. Distant gulls that here meant seaside holidays, not strafing runs. Laughter of nurses comparing notes on dances, the faint ring of hammer on steel from a blacksmith's shop beyond the wall. Life insisting on itself. Yet beneath the peace hummed a certainty. The war hadn't ended on that beach, nor in these tidy wards. Guns still barked beyond the channel, and sooner or later the army would patch us, reissue rifles, send us wherever the line wavered next. I thought of queues reforming, of little ships bobbing back across gray water, of church bells tolling in ruined towers. I felt no dread, only a sober knowledge that surviving once was not guarantee, merely a rehearsal. Even so, England felt solid under boots again, and the air carried more than salt. It carried the smell of bread from the hospital bakery, the promise of letters home, the rumor that Albion yet stood unbowed. That would be enough for tonight. As evening light slanted long and golden across the courtyard, the matron wheeled out a battered piano rescued from some requisitioned school hall. One orderly knew chords, staggered through "Abide with Me." Voices rose, small at first, then sure, threading through lilac scent and coal smoke, out over rooftops, maybe all the way to France if the wind obliged.
I sang too, quietly, the hymn's pauses fitting the rhythm of surf still echoing in bones. When the final note faded, a church in town answered with a single bell stroke, clear, deliberate, marking the hour, marking survival. The sound carried across fields, across years, across everything. I closed my eyes once more, and this time the darkness held no Stukas, no burning oil, only the muffled drum of my own heartbeat and the knowledge that for now I was on the right side of the water, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and smoke, safe enough to dream again, and that somewhere down the ward a scouser with one fewer leg was no doubt charming the nurses, alive despite the channel's best arguments. Home, I thought. Not whole, not finished, but home. And the bell kept ringing in memory, steady as a pulse, promising we were not done yet, only begun again.